There is an attribute that shows up most often, and that is that the person is on a spiritual path, that they are already doing their inner work. They're curious about who they are, what their inner state is, and they're actually doing something about that. Beyond that, the thing that I look for is the type of company they have, not necessarily a specific industry, but is this company one that is healthy? Is it growing? Does it have some places that feel stuck?
Welcome to Career Coaching Secrets, the podcast where we talk with successful career coaches on how they built their success and the hard lessons they learned along the way. My name is Davis Nguyen, and I'm the founder of Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, and even $100,000 weeks. Before Purple Circle, I've grown several 7- and 8-figure career coaching businesses myself, and have been a consultant at 2 career coaching businesses that are doing over $100 million each. Whether you're an established coach or building your practice for the first time, you'll discover the secrets to elevating your coaching business.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Career Coaching Secrets podcast. I'm your host Rexhen, and today's guest is Joseph Logan, an executive coach, organizational strategist, and architect of adaptive leadership models that help high-growth companies scale without losing momentum. As a partner at Jumpsuit, Joseph works with visionary founders, CEOs, and executive teams to move beyond outdated hierarchical structures, replacing control with coherence so organizations can execute up to 2.x faster without burning out their leaders. For over 15 years, he has helped leaders across industries spanning aerospace, biotech, AI, green tech, and more to see and shift the underlying patterns that limit performance. And it's a pleasure for me to have him on the podcast today. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming, Joseph. It's nice to have you on. So wanted to learn a little bit more about, first of all, when it comes to the coaching side of it, like also looking at your profile, it's been more than 15 years with the expansion effect. I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to become a coach and then start your own coaching business?
What inspired me to become a coach was someone who had tried to sell their software to the company that I'd been with before reached out, and they wanted another meeting. This software founder actually kind of forced me into being a coach. I never set out in this direction. In fact, I think I was kind of uncoachable when I first started entering this work. This guy reached out, he wanted a meeting. He had asked, how could we have done a better job of getting your attention? And I thought, curiosity, that's kind of interesting. So we had a meeting. He asked for another meeting after that. They were amazing. Third meeting went by, and then by the fourth, he said, I really get a lot of value out of this. Can I pay you? So I think my path to coaching looks so different from everyone else's. I had a client first. That client forced me to coach, forced me to take their money, and just kind of all took off from there.
And since then, it's been more than 15 years, like 15 years and a half almost. When doing this right now, thinking about how you got started, when doing this right now and going through the coaching journey with your clients, what about it would you say you find most rewarding?
I kind of go back to who I was when I first entered this work. I don't think I understood it very well. I don't think I was particularly open to it. And that kind of helps me to go back and say, okay, how would I have talked to myself 15, 16 years ago? This person who was, leaving an executive role at a pharmaceutical company, didn't have a whole lot of time or patience for coaches. Like, what would have helped that person to become open and really come to value the work? And that for me is the exciting part. It's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes mystery where I'm looking for the clues and saying, okay, what's the story here?
And right now, for the audience that's listening, when it comes to the clients that you work with, how would you describe that ideal client profile? Is there a certain industry? We did mention a couple of industries on the intro as well, but typically, do you find that there is any industry that shows up more often or that you'd like to work with, or is there any demographic? How would you describe the ideal client profile?
There is an attribute that shows up most often, and that is that the person is on a spiritual path, that they are already doing their inner work. They're curious about who they are, what their inner state is, and they're actually doing something about that. Beyond that, the thing that I look for is the type of company they have, not necessarily a specific industry, but is this company one that is healthy? Is it growing? Does it have some places that feel stuck? And when we can find that person who's created something and feels like it's stalled out, they're curious about their inner work. That's a real alignment of the things that tell me, yeah, I can really help this person and I would enjoy helping this person.
And how do you go about it? Like when it comes to the engagement of the coaching that you do, is it one-on-one coaching? Is there a certain program of a certain length? Is it fully customized to the person, or how would you describe that?
It's almost always customized to the person. Some people I can see immediately, this would take about 3 months, the process of helping them to understand themselves, understand the opportunity for them, and to begin to create that movement. Other times it's an open-ended arrangement. I like to joke sometimes that my clients, after a few months, have usually earned their way into a better set of problems. So the problem coming in is never really the underlying problem, but it's the thing that's really intense or powerful for them at that moment. And once we've gotten to the root of that problem, which is usually something in their inner state, they're usually ready to see new opportunities and to go for those opportunities. I've had some clients stay, over 10 years. Some of them, we correct the thing that was painful in 90 days or so, and they're out. I love working with executives and their teams.
Hmm.
Usually, when I can work with the CEO and the team, I get this wonderful effect where I can see the multiple perspectives that they're operating in. And usually you can listen for something that a founder or CEO is telling you and kind of begin to assemble what you believe the story might be. But when you work with that person and the people who work directly with that person, you start to get this sort of 360 view.
Hmm.
And the answers can come faster. The insights are more powerful. They're more validated with reality. So, yeah, there's multiple modes. It usually just depends on what the person's bringing in and also the urgency that they have for the problem.
So when it comes to working with their teams, is that part of your program, or basically it's part of the one-on-one, but it's just like you want to have a 360 assessment kind of, and you're also kind of like looking at the team and like talking to them, but not necessarily coaching the team one-on-one.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It can take both. It is a pretty common thing I'll do to do a 360 with a CEO. And that 360 doesn't stop at the executive team. I talk with that person's friends, their wife, their kids. Like I will talk with anyone who can give me information that will help me help them. So that is something that comes up pretty often. But the most powerful work is when I can coach the team as well. And that just goes back to being one of my first loves. My graduate studies were in organization development with a focus on teams. I know how teams work together. I know how they form, how they coalesce, how they align, how they develop problems. So that for me is a labor of love. Anytime I can get to work with a group of 5 or 6 people who are working together, there's real magic in that.
Cool. So right now, where, and this is a question more for coaches who are listening, where do you find your clients? Is there a certain marketing channel that you find that is working really well?
Um, I'm going to say no to a certain marketing channel that's working really well. What has worked really well, you remember how I got into this? My first client had to force me to coach, then introduced me to a friend of his who also forced me to coach him and forced me to take their money.
Yeah.
So I did this completely differently than most coaches, but I think there's something useful in there. My work has always been inbound, always by referral. Almost
Hmm.
anything that I have done that's artificial to try to target and market to people, it's felt a little flat. And I think the thing that I would share with anyone is that when it's authentic to me, when it's really coming from my heart, any channel works great. And when I'm trying to perform, trying to present myself as the perfect person for this particular ICP, it always falls flat. So, the authenticity is sometimes just in sharing what's really going on for you as a coach. When I can be transparent about what's happening inside of me, people open up about what's happening inside of them. The other thing I would say is every coach I've ever talked with comes to a point where it's like, I don't know if it's okay to say this thing, or I don't know if it's okay to have this perspective. If you're having that question, that's exactly the thing you need to share. Say
Hmm.
the thing you think you can't say because somebody probably needs to hear it.
Interesting. That's an interesting point of view. And when you say that, you're talking about content too, right? Like actually share the thoughts that you have. with the audience, see if it resonates.
Yeah. When you'd asked me about the ICP, the very first thing I said is that they need to be actively in a spiritual path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's something that 15 years ago I would have rolled my eyes at. And 5 years ago, I still would have been afraid to say. But it is key to this work. The fact that some people might be put off by that, that's not something that I can control. What I know is that someone who is actively doing this inner exploration of who they are, curious about their inner state and their existence in this world, that's a person who is ready for the kind of deep work that I do with my clients. So I resisted saying that for the longest time. And now at this point, I just have to say, okay, if you're going to be my client, you need to be on a spiritual path. If you're not, that's okay. If you're offended by that statement alone,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay too. But this is who I work with, and I'm really, really clear about it.
And it makes a lot of sense. So right now, with your coaching business, looking to the future for the next 1 to 3 years, do you have any specific goals you're working towards? Like, where do you see this going?
Most of the time you'll hear goals about numbers of clients or annual revenue or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Next month will be 16 years that I've been a coach. Literally 16 years since that guy said, "Hey, can I pay you for this?"
Mm-hmm.
And I've hit all the goals that I had on the traditional scales. I've made the revenue, I've had the full client portfolio. I've gotten to go and do some amazing things. Like I'm around people who are curing cancer and building airplanes and sending rockets into space. So on a traditional checklist, I've checked all the boxes. The big goal for me in this next stretch is to find people who are doing deep work and are seeing the correspondence of their own deep work in the things that they create in the world. So a lot of it for me is around innovations, not just in technology or in hardware, but literally innovations in society. Are you able to create different management systems for the company you work in? Are you able to incorporate things like ceremony and ritual into the way you do work to begin to mirror your inner growth with the outer expression of that growth? So for me, that feels like a real heart work, soul work.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't fit on anyone's traditional list of like, how do you know if a coach is successful? But if I'm seeing the reflection of these amazing people in the world they're creating, that would
Mm-hmm.
tell me that I'm being successful.
So you're trying to go after a very specific type of audience or type of executive or leader, let's say, compared to what you have done so far.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. The conversations I've had over the last couple of years with CEOs, with founders, with VCs, they're different than the conversations that happened in all of the years before that. Usually, I'm thinking about a VC I talked with recently. I think we talked about the business, the investment landscape, the portfolio of companies for about 3 minutes, and then spent the next 57 minutes talking about his spiritual awakening, talking about how it came about and what it means and what he feels called to create, things that he's able to see that he didn't see before. He could talk so eloquently about all of the years leading up to that, that change, that inflection point. And he could say, yeah, I was really crushing it. Our companies were turning multiples of what we invested in them. We were having exits all over the place. And I was also stressed and burnt out and just felt kind of empty. It felt like the whole thing was shallow. And now with this, I can see more of the landscape. It's like the map unfolds with every step I take. And I am so joyfully in the business of this. And also, our companies are performing better than they ever have before. We're making better picks. Those companies are getting to their exits faster. It's just extraordinary to hear people that you would pass on the street and think, oh, traditional business person, begin to open up about this inner journey and how it is showing up as exponentially improved performance in the businesses they run.
Can you expand a little bit more on the type of spirituality conversation that you're typically having? So we're talking about purpose, and what else is
It largely comes down to expansion of consciousness. You think about it this way. If you were to draw a circle around yourself and say, inside of this circle is everything that I've ever experienced, everything I've ever known, everything I've ever believed. Outside of that circle is all of the things that you have yet to know and experience and believe. And it's a process that I think naturally happens for people over the course of their lives. You think about, do you know how to ride a bike?
Mm-hmm.
But at some point, maybe 4 or 5 years old, you didn't know how to ride a bike, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think about a 4 or 5 year old looking at a bicycle, it's impossible. You couldn't possibly balance on top of that thing while applying alternating pressure and steering and knowing where you want to go all at the same time. It's just so much. But then you have someone who maybe helps you. For me, it was my dad holding the back of the seat of the bike. And you begin to practice and practice and practice. And then one day there's this moment and it just clicks. And suddenly you are riding the bike and you feel the exhilaration of being able to do it and it all comes together. That was something that was outside of your circle until that moment. And then once you step outside that circle, not only do you know how to ride that bike, you know how to ride every bike. And not only can you walk down to the end of the driveway, now you can ride that bicycle to school, to the market, to go hang out with your friends. Your world expands, your possibilities expand. And there's just that moment, and it happens again and again and again, no matter what you learn, what you experience. So I think it's going to happen naturally for people throughout their lives. The way my work really touches me is that they get to create that expansion intentionally. The content of the work almost isn't important to me. It's that process and that concept of self, and how that concept of self is shifting ever so slightly until one moment it just pops. And the kid who couldn't ride a bike is suddenly the kid who is riding the bike and can go anywhere.
So it's a lot about self-development. When we say self-expansion, right? Is that kind of like what it might mean, but it goes a little bit beyond it?
Yeah, it really is your self-concept. That circle you draw around yourself that has all of your experiences, that feels real. That feels like the entirety of the world. But your experience over life is that every reel that you had, you moved beyond at some point. So even though those limitations seem real, they actually aren't. Most of them are, if you've ever seen the Matrix,
Mm-hmm.
some of the rules can be bent and others can be broken, and then you become this different version of yourself. So it's beginning to understand the boundaries of your self concepts and then choosing which of those boundaries to intentionally begin to expand outward. And you can do that over and over and over in your life. It helps if you do it really intentionally.
Interesting. And so when thinking about like this type of work and finding the people who are looking to do more of this, which is also kind of like the goal that you mentioned initially, where do you see the challenge right now in finding the audience that you wanted to kind of serve?
It's a challenge that I think is kind of unlocked for me. If you go back to that previous iteration of my coaching, the first 5 to 10 years, the ICP was really simple. It was startup founders in companies that are in the scaling phase. They're usually beyond the 10 to 15 employees, but before 200 employees, somewhere between a seed and a Series B. Like, that's really easy. You can go on TechCrunch or YC or LinkedIn Navigator, and you can search and pretty well identify those people, reach out and talk with them. That is not something that I've had to do a lot because in my early days, I wanted to know where those people were. I talked to the VCs. I talked to people who had fractional businesses supporting startups, attorneys or CFOs or things like that. But they were so easy to find. Never had to worry about it and had referrals coming in. These days, it's a little harder because I've switched from a demographic to a psychographic. And the psychographic of this person is that they have been successful. They feel like the success is harder and harder to create. They're on this spiritual path, so they're curious about their inner journey. They are already, I think, actively engaged in the process that I'm going to help them through. But you can't really search that up on LinkedIn Navigator. ChatGPT is
Yeah.
not terribly helpful at locating that person. So for me, it switched from outreach, whether it's DMs or marketing campaigns or, email or whatever it is, it switched from thinking that might work to simply putting out a signal. And, like I said earlier, saying the thing you think you can't say. The thing you think you can't say will probably alienate 90, maybe 99% of people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 8 billion people on this planet. And realistically, I can help maybe 8 to 10 of them at a given time. So putting out that strong, clear signal, I think is actually more valuable to me than searching on LinkedIn Navigator and saying, oh yeah, here's a founder who just got a funding round.
Mhm.
It's really that message that I think people are drawn to. And I do think that messaging can work if you do email campaigns or public speaking, appearing on podcasts, whatever it is. But you've got to share that message and you've got to share it clearly and confidently.
Mhm. So that is interesting. And I was thinking as like, how can he reach that audience? Because obviously there's not filters like that. However, content, organic content, I feel like, and the algorithms doing their own work into the people who are constantly looking at the specific content online and then kind of like profiling it against your content. I noticed you on your LinkedIn. One of our mutual connections was Raj Kara. He's another coach that I've had on the podcast before.
Yeah, Raj is amazing.
Yeah, I've had him on the podcast and he shared a lot about organic content. And I feel like that could be one of the ways to kind of get to that audience. I don't think there's like an aggressive way of going about it. And even if there were, like let's say there you find a way to kind of like somehow get 500 people on a wait list for you, would you serve 7 at a time until the next 20 years, or how would that work? Or would you try to expand and like have other coaches join you? I was just thinking like how you're thinking about scale, or you're thinking about maintaining like the type of capacity you have now.
Yeah, I think for most people that would be a champagne problem.
That would be a nice problem to have, yeah.
Yeah, for me, it would actually be a bit of a challenge. I do my individual coaching, and I am really highly curated about who I work with and what the nature of that work is. And at the same time, I work as a part of an agency, and we do a lot of future of work types of projects. So you think about the way I described coaching, that shows up in the organizational structure, in the culture, and in the connection with the community that a company serves. And I see that work as a natural expression of what's happening within the coach. So I've got this 200 person agency that, first off, that's 200 pairs of eyes and ears for the ideal client and people that we can really help. But, there's also just the idea of being in that family of people, being accepted and supported in that way. And I've just found a new level of my coaching in that, but it does come at a cost. I can't take on as many clients, so I have to be really careful about which ones I take on. And I'm not really the person to bring on more coaches and manage them. That's not my path.
Mhm.
But I do have a constellation of coaches that I trust, that I think do really good work, can do really deep work. And so sometimes it's more a matter of me referring people to one of them and you're really trying to find the person that's going to be the best fit for them if it's not me.
Cool. Interesting. You mentioned earlier, before we started the podcast, we're talking about a little bit about the future of coaching. Wanted to see like how what was the perspective exactly? I'm trying to understand that a little bit better since I'm running a podcast here.
Yeah,
I don't know what's
right.
going on.
Well, the last thing I want to do is send your entire audience away. So I think most people who listen to the podcast are probably familiar with Rich Litvin, who was the author of The Prosperous Coach. And Rich does in his content the very thing that we were talking about. He will put a very strong message, usually in a very provocative way. And the provocative thing he had in the last 2 or 3 weeks, he said something like, by the end of 2025, most people you know who are coaches won't be coaches.
Mm-hmm.
I sat back and thought about that, and I said, well, that's a good way to engage the reader. If I'm a coach and I'm reading that, I'm like, oh, my job's going away. I probably need to learn more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think his point was made for emphasis, but this is a time that is requiring more of us. And it's requiring more of us in the way we deliver coaching, in the nature of that coaching, and yeah, in the way we market that coaching. People right now have real problems. They are looking at hybrid work where we now work location independent despite the return to office mandates. They're seeing portfolio careers where the people who work at their company may work somewhere else, maybe 2 or 3 somewhere else's. They're seeing AI collapsing the time from idea to outcome, and that begins to put this huge pressure on the org chart. When you can develop a prototype of a product in less time than takes to have a meeting about developing a prototype of a product,
Mm-hmm.
you've got a serious org structure problem. And so the people that we are addressing, I think, are having evolving needs, and those needs tend to come down to speed, to agility, to resilience. And I personally believe that those things can be unlocked by doing your own inner work. But regardless of how you think you can address those problems, those seem to me to be the problems that are the big ones for most people in business today. So if we still think productivity tips and different ways to find work-life balance, if we still think those are the things that we're coaching people on, I think we're going to be in for a rough patch. This next 2 years promises to be incredibly transformational in the way of work. I think structures will be flatter. I think people will be affiliated with multiple companies. I think location independence is going to continue to be a thing. And who knows what AI is going to bring to the party. But those are the problems people are facing right now. And I think we've got to be really dialed in on those things. I think we've got to talk really persuasively about our approaches to addressing those problems. And I think we've got to talk really clearly about the possible benefits and the lives these people can have. Because right now, the lives most of them seem to have, to me, are stressed, burnout, stretched thin, just can't get things done. We need to be able to promise them a better life than that. And, I'm a big fan of coaching. I think it really takes a former skeptic to be, a real advocate for something. I was a skeptic and I was wrong. This work has changed my life. It's changed the course of my career, and it has changed the lives of hundreds of other people that I've worked with. And so I believe in coaching and I believe in coaches, and I believe we will figure it out.
Cool. Well, the good thing is that coaching is going to be around. It's
Yes.
just going to transform in a different, like the traditional problems potentially are not going to be the ones that we're going to deal up more and more in the future. We're going to deal less and less in the future. And there's going to be more of transformation, even the way you do coaching, but also in the clients that you're coaching. So yeah, the world has shifted quite fast. We don't know where it's going.
I
The
actually
way
believe
AI
that
is
there are going to be
moving.
more coaches. I imagine that in the next 3 to 5 years, you will see just an absolute explosion in coaching, but it's going to be a different type of coaching. I think it's going to be a higher level of coaching. And for the people who are coaching now who can evolve, I think those coaches are going to be the ones who really find their stride in that period of change.
Should we be worried about AI coaching?
No,
Cool.
but not for the reasons some might say. I don't think we should be worried about AI coaching because I think the kinds of coaching we've done in the past, I think AI is pretty good at doing that stuff. I'll give you an example from this week. I've let my calendar get really, really clogged again. It kind of looks like a Tetris game if the Tetris game were like 5 things wide. And so I went to my, personally trained instance of ChatGPT, and I dropped screenshots of my calendar and said, this is really messed up. Here's what I value. Here's what I want to prioritize. Can you help me clean this up? We did a few back and forth, and it cleaned up my calendar. 10 years ago, you would have had a coach doing that. ChatGPT does it fine. And I think what's happening with the AI coaches is they're taking some of that more transactional stuff we used to do, which frees us up to do the strategic, innovative, meaningful stuff that we might do. So, am I worried about AI coaches? No, I'm excited for them. Bring it on so we can begin leveling up.
Interesting. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Joseph. And my last question is for these coaches who are looking to scale their impact, is there any other advice you'd give to these coaches?
Start with yourself, start from your own heart. And I mean, anyone who is coaching ought to have a coach. Any coach who doesn't have a coach, I'm really curious about that. I've personally coached a lot of coaches who are newer, who are entering the field, and help them to avoid a lot of the mistakes I've made. But it usually comes down to two things, clear your mind of all of your ideas and assumptions and really get in touch with what your heart is telling you. My heart has never led me wrong. I get the feeling it doesn't know how to lie. So I think for coaches who are going out to address a market, do it authentically. Know yourself so that you can have an authentic conversation with the people you want to reach. Everything goes more smoothly after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much for coming to our podcast today. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. This is so much fun.
And For anyone who's listening, if you want to reach out to Joseph, you can go into LinkedIn, Joseph Logan. They'll be able to find your profile. Is there any other way they could reach out to you or connect with you?
For people who are looking at larger sorts of engagements, jumpsuitagency.com is a great way to find out about Jumpsuit and all the work we do there. LinkedIn is normally my best home, but you can also find my Substack, which has a lot of my writing, at expansioneffect.com.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Career Coaching Secrets. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this episode to catch future episodes. This podcast was brought to you by Purple Circle, where we help career coaches scale their business to $100,000 years, $100,000 months, or even $100,000 weeks, all without burning out and making sure that you're making the impact and having the life that you want. To learn more about our community and how we can help you, visit joinpurplecircle.com.